Welcome back to another episode of Life's Ambition podcast. Today we are joined by someone who did a total 180 in their career. She's going to give her input on becoming an organizational culture assessor. Without further ado, Joan Shafer. So Joan, how's it going?
Wonderful. It's spring and I'm ready for flowers and warmer weather for sure.
I cannot complain with those thoughts right there. We in North Carolina had 90-degree weather this past weekend, and then all of a sudden we dropped back down to 40. So I don't know how that's even possible, but it seemed to happen. So I totally understand that.
And me, it was the same thing. 2 weekends ago, it was 70 in Chicago, and then it snowed here on Monday. So it's getting cold since, but soon enough.
Well, Hawaii not too long ago, correct?
Yeah, I spend my winters in Hawaii, but the bulk of the year in Chicago. So I'm a very fortunate girl to have that kind of lifestyle.
That's awesome. And what I heard about Hawaii is that it kind of stays in the 70 degrees all year around. So, I mean, that's amazing to hear. But I'd love to get to know you more. And I know the audience will probably love to hear your story and understand more of the world of how did you get into like kind of being a chief content officer and even just in more of the leadership development aspect of evaluating others.
Okay, so my journey was typical and then became atypical. And that's really what I'd like to share with you this morning, because I think there are more people like me than maybe we realize out there.
Yeah.
Well, I grew up in Hartford, Connecticut. I grew up in an upper middle class family in a neighborhood, filled with kids, went to a public school. And when it came time to go to high school, the high school option was not a particularly good one. And so my parents ended up sending me to prep school. It was a day prep school, and I was 6 years there, and all girls. And then, so it was very high-end educational experience. And then from that, I went to Vanderbilt University. And because I loved math so much in high school, that was my comfort zone, right? I went into engineering school, so this was in the 1970s, was not such a common choice as it is today. I mean, today, Vanderbilt now has more females in the engineering school than men.
Really?
Yeah.
That's amazing to hear.
Proud of them. Yeah. And when I went there, Vanderbilt had the second largest intake of female engineers in the freshman class in the country, second only to Michigan State. And we were only 79, and 9 of us graduated.
Wait, so your class shrunk from 79 to 9 people? Or like in terms of female?
In terms of female, because it was easier to get in the engineering school than it was liberal arts. And so a lot of girls transferred out within the first 2 semesters really quickly.
Wow. Holy cow. What was that experience like for you, knowing that you're the second largest class and you're one of 9 people to really like make it?
Well, at the time, I was proud of that fact that Vanderbilt was that progressive. It still is today. And I understood, it was interesting. I thought, well, okay, you may think liberal arts is easier. Engineering school is easier to get into, but it certainly wasn't easier to graduate from. And the 9 of us that did stay the course, I mean, we found our passion. I mean, that was the right place for me, because one of the things I've learned in my career is there are different forms of thinking, and engineering school trains you in a particular direction, and it happens to be the one that suits me, versus law school, versus maybe some other profession. Where you like, if you like learning, like people who are in architecture, they learn how to think spatially. I learned how to identify patterns and be logical in analysis and hypothesis and solutions and so forth. So I was very grateful to have that education.
Mm-hmm.
But what was very interesting for me at the time was, at that time there was the Equal Opportunity Act, and so companies had to have a certain number of women in positions. And when I was a senior, I got over 200 job offers.
Holy cow.
Mainly, because I was a female, and there were so few female engineers nationally. And my dream was to move to San Francisco. That was the place I wanted to be. Even though my best job offer was in Maryville, Tennessee, working for Alcoa, I ended up in Berkeley, California, working for Airco Temescal. And it was a fantastic experience. One, living in the Bay Area, but two, your first job working in manufacturing and in engineering. And actually, that's where I met our friend Mark Goldberg. He was
Oh,
my customer.
did you ever find it tough to move all the way across country
No,
and kind of, no?
no. I've had a nomadic gene in my DNA since I was born.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So, I stayed the traditional course. I went to school, I got interviewed for jobs, I took the position, I went to California, I worked for 3 years at Airco, and then realized one day this wasn't really the right job for me. You can be in a location that you adore, but if you're not happy with your work, it just isn't going to happen. And so I put my application, put my name back out there, and ended up moving to Los Angeles and working for Hughes Aircraft, and which was a brilliant company, and one of the very few that was gender blind. I mean, when I interviewed, they were not looking for a woman; they were looking for a metallurgist, which was what I was specializing in at the time.
And what is that at the time?
So metallurgy is a degree in the engineering school. We like to say materials engineers make the things that make things happen. So we're all about, the composition of what something is made from, whether it's steel or titanium or, everything is comprised of a material, and that's our specialty. And so metallurgists can focus on anything from mining and extraction of how do you get the actual metal, to how do you cast and form it, to how do you, the world of fracture mechanics, how do you protect it from breakage? So I ended up in Los Angeles, working for Hughes Aircraft, which was an extraordinary company, and it was an extraordinary time because we were privately owned at that moment. So we didn't have the pressure of quarterly profit and earnings that a lot of organizations do. And the ethos there was do it right. If you're going to have an experiment, do it as it was. But it was also while I was there, Drew, that I embarked on what I, lightly refer to as Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. I'd been there for probably 7+ years, and I had a very responsible position. I was working on a high-end dark program, meaning it was classified and we were state of the art. I had an extraordinary life in that I owned my own home. I had all the material things that I wanted. I had friends. I had an active social life. And I woke up one morning and I didn't want to go to work. And I wrote it off as, okay, well, maybe I'm just having an off day and I need a day to myself, which was very unusual. And so I took the day off. And I woke up the next morning and I didn't want to go to work. And that was the beginning of, underneath, like a truth that was trying to emerge that I didn't really want to acknowledge. It's like, no, my life is working. I've got all of this together. But on the other hand, there was this empty feeling inside of me. On the outside, everything was looking brilliant, but there was a hole, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And so, long story short, I decided to take a year off and do a round the world trip with a pack on my back. One of my RA in college, my junior and senior year, had done this kind of trip, and I was so inspired and in awe that he had done something like that, that I wanted to do it also. And so I left. And it took me, months to organize and prepare. But once I got on the road, I wasn't gone 2 weeks, and I realized I was never going to go back to aerospace. I was never going to go back to engineering. And I had at that time invested 16 years of my life in that. And what I was going to do, I had no idea. But it was the start of, if you will, my path of what is it that I'm really supposed to do. And when I look back, the questions I would be asked, starting when I was in high school from, my parents' friends, and part of it's conversational, but part of it is, their interests. What do I want to do when I grow up? What do I want to do when I graduate? And I look back, and I'm 71 years old now. I look back on that now, and I think, there's no way I could have known that, but I felt wrong for not having clarity. Like, I should know this. And I went through all the steps that you do. I went to school, I graduated, I got excellent grades, I was on the dean's list, I got academic honors, and then I had all these job offers, and I went and I applied, and I got accepted all these places, and I made my choices. But it wasn't really me, but I didn't know who really me was. And that was pretty frightening. But so many people, so many of my peers at the time were so assured, I want to go into medicine, I want to go into the arts, I want to go work with children, I want, whatever. And inside of myself, I felt insufficient, and I felt wrong for that unknowing.
Which is crazy, because I hear about it a lot now where people have no idea what they want to do, like going into college or just once they're outside of it, because there's so much out there at this point. And I'm very fond of those who know exactly what they want to do. But like, my friends, people that they know, there's even people that I have met later on in their career that were that I find more of that are in the exact same position that you were in, where you were just unsure. So I totally get that.
Yeah. I now think really only about 5% of people in high school have the gift of that awareness. There's some people who have a calling from when they're really young, like, I want to be a cellist, I want to be a healer, I want to be a designer. But the pressure to know what you want, I think, is too great in our society.
And do you think that's just the reasoning, is it's hard to make a decision of this is the path I want to take? Because for me, I felt a little less pressure when choosing a career. Like, I'm a geospatial data scientist right now, and my mom and dad, they always grew up telling me, it's like, you're never married to the career you choose. You can always choose something differently. And they kept instilling that every time I thought about something, whether that was in college or in high school, that as long as you're happy doing what you do, then that's really all that mattered to them. So I felt a lot of pressure off of me, but I know that's not the case for everyone.
I think we just don't want to look like we're clueless or we don't belong, that we're confident and assured. And I think it's great. It's brilliant that your parents supported that part of you. Because I think one of the biggest learnings is if inside, if you're not really, really happy. And that's the prompt of, okay, you have to step out into the unknown. And that is terrifying.
Yeah. And was this trip for you? What was like the part where it all just kind of clicked that I'm just not going back to doing aerospace?
I was 2 weeks out, and I realized I didn't have the love for it that I thought I did. I loved the people I work with, and I think we will find people we love everywhere we go. So that can't be the deciding factor. You just have to have faith that whatever you choose, there are always wonderful people everywhere. it's being true to yourself and to your calling. And the biggest thing that happened for me in my travel was I got in touch with my intuition. I got, I was really open to more like feelings of like, go this direction versus that direction. This would be a better place for you. Don't get in that car, or don't get in that cab, or something. That there was a inner awareness and a sense of guidance to start to follow. It really was my spiritual awakening also.
What do you mean
Where
by that?
I felt that connection to, I was agnostic up to that point in my life, up to the point when I traveled. And then when I got on the road and I'm by myself, I just knew I felt that I was no longer alone, that, I was being watched over in a way. And because I didn't have the distraction of a schedule and the busyness of work, I was more attuned to like that type of a connection.
And do you feel like this tingling sensation kind of in your body, like once you felt it? Because that's how sometimes, like when I find that I'm on the right path, like I feel this like
You
almost
know,
sensation. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
and it's like the universal lines to supporting you. It's like all of a sudden, the flow is so extraordinary. You think, oh my gosh, this must be the right thing, right?
hmm and it's a crazy aspect that it's almost impossible to describe other than it's just outside forces telling you that this is the right thing to do.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
so, how did it all change for you? How did you move then from one career over to another? Did you have to do classes? Was it like any certifications? Like what was the kind of the mind shift to it?
So again, this was also very atypical. I knew I was going to travel for the year, so I had that plan, if you will, in mind. So I did that. And then I decided at the end of the trip, I thought, well, what am I going to do next? And I thought, I think I'm going to write a how-to book for women to travel on their own. Not, oh, look what I did, but here are the practicalities of it. And I ended up renting this small house on a Greek island where I was going to spend the next year writing and putting my thoughts together. But life had different plans for me. So I rented this house, and instead I met the guy who I married, who was a Greek, and I ended up renting beach beds and umbrellas on a Santorini beach for an entire season, making more money. This is shocking. Making more money doing that than when I was a project manager in aerospace.
Did you really?
Unbelievably so, but that's because
Holy cow.
expenses were just so low and we were making money hand over fist. We were not overcharging. It was just how it was. But but it, but it was that journey in my marriage where as profoundly as we loved each other, my husband suffered from alcoholism, and that was the end. I couldn't, it wasn't sustainable for me. And in the process of divorcing him, moving back to the States, going down my own path of recovery from that kind of incident, because how could I, who has grown up with the kind of background that I have and the education I have, have gotten myself in that situation. But that's when I got introduced to the 12-step program, and I got into Al-Anon, not initially willingly, but I had so many people recommend you should try this. And a big turning point in my life was while I was in Al-Anon, which is for the friends and family of alcoholics, and in a recovery process, that really is your inner journey. Like, what's going on for me and my behaviors? What are my fears? What are the things that I'm doing that aren't helpful? And had lunch one day with my oldest male friend who said, "You're in the wrong program. You should be in AA." And although I had stopped drinking a year prior to that, he was right. And I ended up being an AA person more than an Al-Anon person. and spent the next 3 years in recovery from that. I mean, learning about the disease, learning about addiction, learning about behaviors associated with that, and how do you deal with addicts and alcoholics. And from a logical point of view, people who don't have addiction look at people who do and think, why don't you just stop? Can't you see the insanity of what you're doing? And the addict or the alcoholic is the last to really see it. And because your disease tells you you're fine. And an addiction, it isn't something you can mentally control. And that's the horror of it.
Hmm.
But in the course of that experience, Drew, that is where I learned, because AA meetings are circle groups where you listen to people share. And so you develop listening skills. You develop skills around compassion because you're hearing other people share their stories in a very vulnerable way, where they're not being judged, where they are coming in for a place of support. You learn how to facilitate meetings. You learn how to ask questions without judgment. And so that was game changing for me. But meanwhile, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? I'm out of aerospace. I'm no longer married. I've gone through this recovery process. Now what? And again, now I'm in my 30s, but I'm right back in high school with, what's wrong with me that I don't know what I should be doing? I should know this kind of thing. And so I took all kind of assessment tests about, and I'm not kidding you. It's should be a forest ranger. That was one of my options. But, and those tests can be very helpful. And in my case, I just still wasn't ready or able to see what it was that I was supposed to do. And I decided, well, what is it that I really love? And I love traveling. I mean, when you said, how do I feel about moving the West Coast? I'll move anywhere. I don't have any problem traveling anywhere in this world. I feel really comfortable on Earth. And I thought, I'm going to get into the adventure travel business. I'm going to be an adventure travel guide. And so I devoted an entire year getting trained I became an EMT with a specialty in wilderness medicine. I went to the National Outdoor Leadership School and how to lead groups, not outward downward like you face your fears. NOLS, National Outdoor Leadership School, is how do you be a leader of those people that you're going to take out and have those experiences with. And then I put together all these different trips together and marketed. And I went through the whole thing of setting up a whole new business, and it completely failed. And that was the dark night of the soul in my life. I mean, now what am I going to do? And now what is really wrong with me? Everybody else seems to be, married, kids, profession, doing whatever. And I was lost. And then I realized I'd just been sitting in my office feeling sad and sorry for myself. And I thought, I've got to do something. I've got to take some action. And I ended up I had a folder. I thought, I have to get away. I have to go change my scene. And I had this folder of things that I had cut out, places to go. And, it wasn't like, oh, I want to go to Paris and sightsee. And I pulled out this piece of paper that talked about this spiritual community in Scotland. And I thought something we talked about that inner tingling feeling, like something pinged me, something tapped me. And I wrote them and thought, I'm going to go there for 6 weeks. And I got there and I found home. And that was my spiritual home. And I spent 3 years there. So
6 weeks turned to 3 years?
6 weeks turned to 3 years. I became a member of staff there. But it's still part of the inner work. It's, what is it? Who am I? What do I want to do? And it was while I was there that one morning, talk about working with your intuition. In this community, everything was decided by intuition. You would sit in a group circle and then go into meditation and come out and say, what was the message that you got? Yes, no, what direction should this take? So I was in Findhorn, Scotland for 3 years. And while I was there, I met the person who became my business partner. I was running the conferences at the foundation, and we had a spirituality and business conference where we had people from all over the world attend. And on the morning of registration, it's a week-long event, and on the morning of registration, this one guy walked in the room. He's on the other side of the ballroom, and our eyes met, and there was like this bolt of lightning, and it wasn't sexual or physical. It was something else. And we noticed that there are hundreds of people in this event. And then we noticed that over the next 3 days, our paths kept being thrown together. And that's where, we just you have to pay attention to the signs and signals that the universe is giving you. And we recognized it and said, what's going on here? I mean, he's happily married and I'm at Findhorn. He lives outside Washington, D.C. But he got called. He was one of the keynote speakers, and he gave his talk 2 days later, and then he got called away. He was supposed to be there for the week, and he needed to go to the airport. And I said to a friend of mine, we have to take him to the airport. And I thought, what am I doing? I have 100,000 things to do, but I'm going to take this guy to the airport. So my friend's driving. I don't even need to be in the car. The two of them were in the front seat, and as we're driving to the airport, to this day, Drew, I have no idea where this came from, but out of my mouth, I said to him, if you ever he was working at the World Bank. I said, if you ever decide to leave the World Bank and you want to work with someone, I'd be interested. And I remember looking around thinking, who said that? Anyway, a couple of days later, he called and he said, how serious were you? And I said, I was very serious. And that was the extent of our conversation. And then my life went on, and the following April, his path and mine again crossed serendipitously in Stockholm, Sweden. I was there for something else and still living in the spiritual community. And he was doing a 2-day workshop, and he said, come over. Why don't you join me for this workshop? And so I did. And I said to him, I think I have something to offer you here. And we sealed the deal. We hardly knew each other, and we decided to become business partners. And so 28 years ago, he and I started the Barrett Value Center. So I've done a lot of talking. Let me pause and see if you have any questions.
No, I mean, I think I want to say I'm sorry that you had to go through the divorce, especially going to AA and stuff like that. I know that can be very tough, but it's also the path. It almost seems like you were kind of meant to take, because it, like you said, it helped you develop questionnaire skills, listening skills, even then sending you over into Sweden, or getting you all to the point where you see them in Sweden. That's just crazy to me to think about. And I'd love to know more about this Barrett Foundation, how you guys just decided to go on a whim. I know obviously there were signs pointing where you guys should be talking and meeting one another, but how do you put your trust in someone that you've just met to be a business partner on that kind of scale?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Richard was the values coordinator. His name is Richard Barrett. Richard was the values coordinator at the World Bank, and he had developed a model on paper that you could plot words against. And he was traveling around the world presenting this model because it was a way of looking at organizations and culture. And when Richard and I met, there was clearly something that was meant to happen. And what I've come to learn, Drew, is when that, I'll call it magic, or that kind of unexpected experience crosses your path, it's you have to take it seriously and not write it off. And Richard's an engineer, I'm an engineer, and on a thinking level, and both of us, our spiritual lives are very important to us. So we had that connection, and there was just a comfort and a faith between us. And the fact that our paths literally kept being thrown together like it's like, okay, we're supposed to do something. And denying it is terrible. I mean, I think you just end up worse. So we decided to become business partners. And in September of he left the World Bank in June of 1997. I left Findhorn in September. We started in September, and it was just the two of us. And Richard had been doing keynote speeches literally around the world, just showing this model. And the editor of Fast Company magazine, Alan Weber, saw this. And he said, I want to have a reporter follow you. And so Richard he's very, very charismatic on stage. He's very strong in presentation, and it's one of his gifts. He and I were invited to a business and spirituality conference. It's an annual event in Mexico, and we were there, and he gave his talk on stage, and there were two partners from McKinsey and Company from Australia there. And they went up to Richard afterwards and said, you're really onto something. And Richard and I now are working together to create a methodology to measure corporate culture. And it's like, how do you take what's invisible and make it visible in a way that you can put metrics against it? And that, that's where our engineering training came in. And we recognized, so because of Richard's genius in the creation of the model, and then the two of us putting form on it together, I created the trainings. We decided our business model was going to be that we're going to train consultants in how to use this methodology.
And can I ask what this model is? Is it more just like a presentation base of what it would entail, or is it like developed through some coding language?
No, it's okay. No, it's a great question. The model itself is based on, initially was based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So it was like levels 1 through 4. So you start off with, survival, and then you get into relationship, and then you get to self-esteem, and you get to self-actualization. But the realm of self-actualization was something that Maslow himself recognized needed to be unpacked. And
Gotcha.
So what Richard did was he took the self-actualization and then he blew it up into 3 more levels. And so the model is what it's now called the Barrett model. And it's essentially what we called in the original days the 7 levels of consciousness.
I've heard of this before. Okay, cool. Yeah. Now it's gotcha.
And so what we're able to do is take it's the world of values. So the way that the assessment works is people go online and they're asked the question of choose the 10 values and behaviors that best reflect who you are, not what you want to be. We give them a list of 100 words. And they're things like family and health and integrity, generosity, compassion, community service. I mean, there's no right or wrong. And you choose the 10 values that best represent who you are. And then out of those 10 words, what we do is we take those 10 words and we place them in the model. So you can see what level of consciousness if you will, you're at. There's no right or wrong. There's no better or worse. Then it's just like, where's your focus? When you do that with a collective of people, let's say we're working with a company that's got 50,000 employees, and we ask them, what are your values? What you're able to see is a pattern that a certain organization attracts a certain type of person, right? Which really helps your hiring practice. And then we ask the second question of what do you see the values of your culture to be, of your organization to be? And we give words in that second list of values like customer satisfaction, teamwork, innovation. And we also had words in there like bureaucracy, controlling, demanding, blame, manipulation. So we're able to see how healthy a culture is or how unhealthy a culture is. And then the third question of the survey is what values do you think are most important for this organization to reach its highest potential or be high performing. So in the end, you get a picture of what's most important to the person, what's happening in the organization right now, and what's the roadmap for where people think it should go.
And what level, or so let's say your company's 50,000 people. Are you sending it to all 50,000 or maybe just the higher ups like the CEO, CFO, COOs and stuff like that? Or is this evaluation going to everyone? And then you can kind of see the correlation of, oh, everyone, this company may be more demanding because a lot of people have selected that aspect of that for one of their 10 values.
So the survey ideally goes out to everyone, and the cost structure is such that it's not a per person fee. It's a flat rate. So the more voice you get, the better. And what's interesting about this survey is typically when you do surveys within companies, you get something like an 18 to 20% response rate. When you're asked about your culture and your values, we found that the response rate is much higher. So it's appealing to the people. But we do demographic breakdowns, Drew, in asking of what's your position. So we get the C-suite perspective, the next C-1, C-2. We do it by position, we do it by location, we do it by department. You can do it by age, you can do it by zip code, you can do it by anything you want. You can do it by gender, and you get a sense of, you look at let's say an organization that has offices all over the United States, and you look at Atlanta and you think, wow, these guys are knocking it out of the park. And then you look at Miami and saying, uh-oh, what's going on here? So you get to deep dive to learn from Atlanta, how is it same business, same leadership, high-end leadership, that it's working there but not working someplace else, because you're wanting to go and help.
And I guess I got two questions off of that then, is how often do you find the top C-suite level and their values being different from just entry-level workers? And then also, is it better to have different values at each level rather than everyone having kind of the same value altogether?
So personal values are actually not that different between senior leaders and not.
Really? So that means that the culture goes all the way through because you're hiring people that are like-minded.
Exactly.
Oh, okay.
I mean, if you went into Coca-Cola to interview, and then you went into Pepsi to interview, they're both produce extraordinary products, right? But you have a feel. You have a feel of, I like this one better than the other. And it's almost invisible, but there's a draw. And what the values show is, what's the draw? One isn't better than the other, but there's one that resonates with you more than the other.
Gotcha. And because there's one that resonates more with another, let's say the top C-suite is more demanding. That's their top value. And then the one or all the way entry level position, they very much value community and service and all that stuff. Do you find that maybe those companies may not work better together just because they value then the different aspects?
It's the companies working together. There are a lot of people who want to go into a culture where they're stretched. They want the leadership to be demanding of them, to see what they can produce and do. The people who find that style to not work for them, they shouldn't be there. And that's one of the things that hopefully this kind of work shows to people of, you're in the wrong place.
Yeah. How do you like being part of this? Is this something very cool because you get implemented in all these different companies and you're like, oh, this is cool finding out what their culture is. And then, oh, let's go over to this company. I get to find out what they're all about.
Absolutely. I mean, what this work does is provide conversations of profound meaning for the leadership to see what's going on in our organization. and where are we healthy, what differentiates us, where are we strong, what is it that's our DNA versus our competitors, what's different, what's the path that we want to take. But to answer your question, did I love it? The answer, I loved it. But again, this goes back to, if you will, to I'm not at Barrett Value Center anymore. I left there, in 2007. But Richard and I were, we expanded the firm. We're training consultants all over the world. We're working directly with companies. We're working with leaders. And early in our business development together, I think we'd been working together not 2 months when we realized we had clients. I mean, we had small organizations that we were doing this work on. We were manually drawing out all these plots, and everything is, of course, automated. Was we realized what is it that creates the culture, and it's the leadership. And that we had to create an assessment of the leadership. And so we developed a 360 assessment called the Leadership Values Assessment that became my birth child. So Richard had developed the initial model, and we adopted the model from how do you look at it from a corporate point of view to how do you look at it from a leader's point of view, an individual leader. And so we developed the LVA, the Leadership Values Assessment, where we ask the leader, what are your leadership values? Not your personal values. What are your leadership values? Because they're different. And then we have 20 to 30 people that the leader knows write in, take the survey for the leader and say, what do you see this person's values to be? And so we're able to compare the leader's values to what the collective is seeing this person's values to be. And it's incredibly valuable information, and to see what is your brand, how am I coming across, what's most important to me, being seen or not being seen. So we're not looking at behaviors, we're looking at more under the iceberg, like what is it that drives what people see. So in 2007, I was senior partner. Richard and I now have, we've developed a firm. We've trained, over 1,500 consultants globally, and we're working with, big firms like, Bain and Ernst & Young and McKinsey, and really succeeding. And one day I woke up, we have an international conference every year. I organize it. I woke up and we're in the Netherlands, and I thought, I just want to go walk on the beach. And I thought, here we go again. It's like, no, this can't be right. I love my partners. I love this work. I'm the heir apparent. Richard's, 10 years older than I am. But it was, again, that spiritual tap of, nope, it's time for a change. And I couldn't believe it. It took me 6 months, but it's like, I realized you have to follow, I think for me, I have to follow those prompts. I shouldn't put it in you form, because there's something bigger and better out there for me. Now, I left the firm in 2007, and Richard actually left later, and he has started yet another venture. But I left, and I was 6 months in that I won't say dark space. I was in a recovery space. I had somewhat burned out, and I needed to rejuvenate. And 6 months later, I'm in the backyard of a friend of mine in the UK. I'm there for a visit, and I felt this jolt, like this lightning bolt coming to me. And I thought, what just happened? And I thought, I'm back. I'm ready, I'm ready to go again. And I walked into my friend's house, and I opened up my email, and there's an email there from a business colleague of mine saying, I need to talk to you. So I reached out to him, and he said, look, you've been doing work for our firm for some time. I want to talk to you about coming and working with us more frequently. And this guy's based in London. And I said, he said, when can we get together? And I said, well, I happen to be in the UK right now. So we met in person the next day, and he said to me, his name was David Carter, and he ran a mentoring firm. He created what is now in the U.S. known as the Exco Group. And he said, I want you to come and be our chief learning officer. And I said, okay. And I want you to do all the LVAs. I want you to do all the 360 assessments. And that is what I've been doing now for, let's see, so that was 2008 to today. So for 17 years, I've been doing it for the Exco Group. And the most common question I'm asked, Drew, when I meet a new person is they'll say, how long have you been retired? And I say, well, I'm not, because I have, but for the grace of God, if you will, I have found the work I love. And it's a soul love. It's not a head love. And if there's any message that I would want to share in this conversation with you is if your soul is not loving what you're doing, never mind what everybody else thinks or what your head thinks or what you should think, but if you aren't from like an inner profound level adoring what you're doing, it's time to make a change.
I agree. Because I don't want to wake up one day and be like, what did I just do with my life? Like it just, because it goes by so quickly. And especially as I'm getting older, I find that more and more that days and weeks and even months just fly by really fast. And so that is a big fear is, will one day I wake up and be like, what am I doing? What have I done all this time to kind of get to this point? And that's why I want to do this. And this is my way of sharing to other people of what else is out there, because I don't want people to have that experience, because I find that if you have that experience, that just means that you knew you should have been doing something else, and that there was something else planned for you that was out there, and that you could do more. And my question, when I was thinking that you've had these realizations about, you woke up one day and you're like, I want to go to the beach, or I don't necessarily want to go to work today. Did you find that because you have learned more of the industry and a lot of what you did there, do you find that there was a cap to your learning and that maybe progressed you to a different direction? Maybe that was the feeling that you had?
You mean, had I learned as much as I could, really, and it was time to leave? I don't think so in my case. I really trust, the faith is a big part of my life. And I'm not talking about the religious right or some particular strict doctrine. It's really sensitizing yourself. What am I supposed to be doing? What feels right? And honoring that inner voice that you have that says, it's time. Maybe you do cap out in a learning and it is time to do something, but not to let fear of the unknown hold you back. Is trust yourself, even though you may think you're clueless and not know what you're supposed to do. But if you have the prompt, go with it, because like they're out there waiting for you.
Mm-hmm. And in all your time with working with these different leadership groups, what would you say are some of the biggest qualities that you see everyone saying about their respective boss or manager or leadership role? And what would you say is important to you to have in someone else?
Okay. So I'm happy to answer that question. And I'm going to give you a little background as to, if you will, the database that I'm drawing from. So I've been doing these 360 assessments on leaders for 28 years, and I've done thousands of them. And I have had the extraordinary privilege of meeting with senior executives from all forms of industry, from all types of country, geographies, small organizations to multi-billion organizations. And the firm that I do this work with, the Exco Group, is, if there was a metal better than, I'm a metallurgist, if there was a metal more valuable than platinum, we would be that. Because our firm is comprised of former senior business leaders who are now mentoring present day leaders. And to a person, every one of our mentors, they love what they do. They love this work. It comes from a soul place. And because they've sat in the chair of being a leader, they're not only a coach, but they're a mentor. They're not there to run the business, that they know the questions to ask. And I have the privilege of meeting most of the clients that we work with, because most of them we do the 360 assessment with. So I've seen literally thousands of assessments of senior leaders of what's working and what's not. So to answer your question, it's the following. In other words, what are the traits that make exceptional leadership? Number one, are you authentic? Is what you say match with what you do? Is there alignment there? Because if you say one thing, do something else, people see that really quickly and they're not going to trust you. So that's one piece. Secondly, how well do you connect with people? The relationships, capabilities, and skills can never be understated. Our most, if you will, problematic leaders are the ones that are least effective at developing relationships. When I'm talking about relationships, I'm talking about with your peers, with the people who work for you, with the people who you work for. How do you play on teams? How do you run teams? How invested are you in the people who are working for you? How invested are you in the people that are working above? Because we look at what we call relationship values, and the number of times we see 0 is more alarming, or it's more shocking than you would think. But the ones who have relationship values, genuine network. So authenticity, relationship capability. And are you, as a senior leader, what's your big picture thinking? You have to get out of the being more tactical and getting into being more strategic and visionary. And then the fourth piece I would say is your degree of integrity, right?
Mm.
Do people believe that you're going to do the right thing? Can they trust? Can they know that you're going to do the right thing when nobody's looking?
And what would you say is important to you? Those 4 things, or would you say it's something different?
You mean for the leaders that I work for?
Yes.
For me, the most important thing is, does the person have integrity? For sure. That's my value alignment, Drew. When we talk about what values, are going to pull me in, that's the one. I don't care how flash it is. I don't care about the money. I don't care about the clientele. I want to know, is our work making a profound difference in the lives of others? And it certainly is. And the second thing is, can I trust the people that I work with and respect them? And the answer to this is, resoundingly yes.
I think those are really great qualities. And for people that are trying to get into this space, where would you tell them to look in terms of even just gaining knowledge about the aspect?
When you talk about getting into space, are you talking about becoming a mentor or
just even learning more about the 360 views, learning more about becoming a mentor, anything like that?
I think I would say the following. There are a lot of people in the marketplace who are coaches and the motivation for, I think, most of those people is admirable, and that they want to help impact the lives of other people, for sure. And for a lot of people, they've had a transformational life experience, and they've now gone through the hero's journey, if you will, and they've come out on the other side, and they want to give back to more people, and they become a coach. And I think, you have to be really, there are a lot of them in the marketplace, and you have to be really clear about, are you doing this? Why are you doing this for yourself? If you are not good at marketing, you have to become like, who's going to be your clientele? Because you're up against a lot of competition. To be one of our mentors, you have to have been gone through a career of various leadership positions and worked your way to the top. And then at that point, you're ready to leave that position, but you want to do something that still has meaning in life. And one of the things that you've discovered is, along the way, is helping people is one of your greatest joys. And so these are how these people become our mentors. But in general coaching, there's a lot of training programs to become a coach. I would just say, go in with your eyes wide open about who is it that you want to target, and are you really the right person to target that group? Get a lot of training and a lot of certifications, but know your niche market. I don't know if that's clear enough. In other words, there are a lot of people say, I want to go coach C-suite executives. That might be more from an ego place than who is it that you really want to help, where there are more middle managers who, I think there's a massive market for that, but people want to say, well,
I'm talking to so and so kind of thing. But no, that makes perfect sense. And the best way I can kind of compare the coaching aspect to like even what I've experienced and learned is, so my grandpa and Mark Goldberg, they work with this group called SCORE, and it's all about retired people in their line of work that volunteer their time to help new upcoming entrepreneurs of all sorts of different backgrounds. And they love doing it. For when I talk to them, they absolutely adore it. And for even in your career field and for what you do for others in the 360 view, there's a sense where people always want to give back. Like I played hockey for years and I love doing learn skate. I haven't done it as much recently, but I definitely want to get back to it in the future, or even like coach, just because I want to give back and know I made a difference on someone else and help them on with their career. I feel like that's always a human nature to do that. And I think what you're doing is awesome. And I really do appreciate you being on the show today. It means a lot.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. And I appreciate you sharing your story.
Okay.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in today's episode. I'm fortunate enough to share these amazing people with you. If you'd like to support the show, you can follow our Patreon, which can be found going through our website link listed below, or place a 5-star rating depending on what platform you're listening to. Thanks again, and catch you in the next episode.